Men go to a urologist. Women go to a gynecologist. Anyone confused about this should see a psychologist.
Hey girl, psychologist here. Medical inaccuracies aside, I was just wondering which psychologist you are talking about because I know it's not the psychologist because they say that various forms of gender affirmation, including psychological, social, medical, are associated with higher psychological outcomes like lower depression and higher self esteem. I also know it's not the psychologists whose research has found that transgender youth seeking gender affirming medical treatment at younger ages, like puberty blockers, report better mental health outcomes and well being compared to those seeking treatments later in life through things like hormones. I also know it's not the psychologists who also says that gender affirming surgery leads to improved mental health outcomes, which includes reduced anxiety, reduced depression, reduced gender dysphoria, as well as lower rates of suicidality. I also know it's not this Canadian psychologist whose doctoral work found that transgender youth who receive gender affirming hormones show significant improvements in well being and decreased suicidality. I also know it's not the psychologists who says that parents of transgender youth see gender affirming medical care as beneficial and even life saving to their children. These psychologists also say parents of transgender youth are deeply concerned about the laws that restrict these types of gender affirming care that we're seeing in the United States, viewing them as harmful to their children as well as a violation of their children's rights. But it's not just in North America. These psychologists found that transgender youth in New Zealand who were unable to access gender affirming care experienced significantly worse mental health outcomes, including higher rates of psychological distress, self-harm, and again, suicide attempts. In the Netherlands, the psychologists examined barriers and challenges that transgender and gender diverse individuals face when seeking gender affirming care, and they found that, of course, these challenges and barriers are related to worsening mental health conditions. In my own country of South Africa, these psychologists trace how psychology in South Africa has shifted from pathologizing LGBTQI people during the apartheid regime to developing a more affirmative practice guideline for working with gender and sexually diverse people. The shift in practice guidelines among South African psychologists, as well as the regulator of psychological practice in South Africa, is, of course, in line with international trends, which further demonstrates a global consensus on how we should address gender affirming care, at least from a psychological perspective. There's also the psychologists who actually goes into more detail describing the development of the Psychological Society of South Africa, and its encouragement of psychologists to take a more affirming, non-discriminatory approach when working with gender diverse and transgender clients. And of course, this includes supporting access to gender affirming care. Lastly, I think these psychologists really hit the hammer on the nail on the head, whichever metaphor you want to use. They actually advocate for moving beyond just gender affirming care for gender diverse and transgender individuals towards a more comprehensive approach that addresses the systemic oppression that works towards liberation for both transgender and cisgender individuals from very restrictive and harmful gender norms. Hope that helps. Bye.